All right, hello friends, and welcome into Module 3. This is where we start to get into the real nuts and bolts of economic analysis, and we're going to start where we always start with that, and that is the theory, the model of supply and demand. Now, before I get into the actual technical parts of demand and supply analysis and equilibrium, I always feel it's important to take a kind of a step back, bit of a bird's eye view, and put the supply and demand model in the context of some bigger economic questions. So I want you to understand the mechanics of the model. I need you to understand the shifts and all the stuff that we're going to learn about how to use and manipulate and take advantage of the model's power to predict. But I also need you to be able to put that model into a broader context to see where it fits in. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in this video. When we talk about economics, we've talked about scarcity. And because of scarcity, we believe that every society, every nation, every economy has to answer three basic questions as a result of scarcity. Okay, so we have to answer three basic questions, and those questions are: what goods will be produced? It's the what question. How to produce those goods, that's the how question, and most critical, the distribution question is: for whom will they be produced? So again, society has to answer, an economy has to address three basic questions brought on by scarcity: what to make, how to make it, and who gets it. Okay, now that's pretty straightforward. Scarcity requires those choices. But where we jump into political economy is when we ask how to answer those questions. And we believe in economics that there's two primary, there's lots of, gray and lots of, granular stuff, but at the big level, there's two primary ways to answer those three questions. You can organize via a market mechanism, so we'll call that market organization, or you can organize via political organization. Okay, so when you hear about the market system, you'll hear that a lot. We talk about it in here a lot. People talk about the market and market economies and things like that, capitalism, market economy. You have to be able to put that term, a market or a market economy or capitalism, in the context of the three big questions, okay? Market organization is just one way, probably the best way, the most efficient way, but it's just one way of answering those three basic questions of what to make, how to make it, and who gets it, okay? Let's dig in a little bit deeper to what these two systems are about. Under market organization, we also call that capitalism or the free market. Private individuals make their own self-interested plans. They make their own rational, self-interested decisions, plans and decisions, and the key is they're guided by market prices. So when we talk about the market organization or the market method, it's really driven by individual units, businesses, firms, and households, seeking out utility, seeking to advance themselves, seeking out their self-interest, and making their decisions based on those self-interests. But critically, making those decisions with the guidance of prices. Okay? In this sense, another way to say it is the three basic questions, what to make, how to make it, and who gets it, are answered via a very decentralized decision-making process. Okay? This is something that the communists could never quite understand about a capitalist or a market system. The fact that everything happens, it's this organized chaos where everything happens without some sort of central planner. Okay, market organization is distinguished by a few different tenets. We've discussed them a little bit: private ownership, voluntary exchange. But we also need to think about the fact that market economies also align to the political values of freedom and free decision making. And that's something to keep in mind, okay? Now, under political organization, we also call this collective decision making. The government, through the political process, makes the decisions for buyers and sellers. So in other words, those three basic questions, what to make, how to make it, who gets it, those are solved, answered, addressed by the government. Now, sometimes this happens in our own economy, and we know that in a democratic setting, voting, taxes, regulations, those types of collective action, which we would hope, which we think, which we assume are driven by a democratic process, those determine the actions undertaken. Much more prevalent, though, and much more serious is socialism. And socialism is a system of centrally planned economic organization, but critically, the state, the government, owns everything. They own and control the resources. And when you own and control the resources, as the state does in socialism, the state also then has to take accountability for the questions of how to make things and who gets them. So in a socialist, a communist, those types of economies, the government owns all the resources. In addition, the government sets production targets, they develop master plans, and most critically, they establish the guidelines on who gets it. Now, I would hope that already you can start thinking about some of the incentives at play here and how the incentives that affect individuals and firms in markets might be somewhat different from the incentives that face the state in a communist or socialist economy. Okay, one of your tasks in economics is to think about those trade-offs and to understand what is the superior system. Okay, I'm going to give you the answer now. The superior system is our system, a market system. Okay, it's not perfect. People complain at times that market systems fail, but the real question to ask is, what is the next best alternative? There's also opportunity costs here. So anytime somebody were to say, for example, well, capitalism is terrible, market systems suck, the real question is, okay, what do you propose as the alternative? Because when we compare capitalism and socialism, it's a clear-cut victory for us, for the capitalist, laissez-faire, free enterprise system, okay? Now that we understand that context, let's jump into a little top-level discussion of the supply and demand model. The supply and demand model, first and most critically, it illustrates a competitive market. Now, we're going to learn in this class about competitive markets, but there's also markets where competition does not dominate. So we have competitive markets and we have non-competitive markets, and we're going to be comparing and contrasting those later on in the semester. But for now, just understand that the supply and demand model, it illustrates a competitive market. Now, we know that a market for any good consists of the buyers and sellers for that good. And we also know that market can also be kind of a broad term for any place or device. It could be physical, like an actual market. It could be virtual, like Amazon. But a market is not just the process of bringing buyers and sellers together, but a market can also be seen as the device or the location where they come together. Okay, so it's kind of a broad term, but your goal is to understand their benefits. A competitive market, as we're going to define it, has many buyers and sellers. And the key to this is that when there's that many buyers and sellers, no individual person or company has any real market power. No real control over price. And that's really the key takeaway of a competitive market. Okay, yes, there's many buyers and many sellers, and they typically sell relatively similar homogeneous goods, and there's free information and these other criteria. But the real key to a competitive market is to understand that when there's that many buyers and sellers, market power is diffused, it's spread. No one individual buyer, no one individual seller has any real market power. and therefore no one has any real control over price. Which leads to the question, well, if the individual firm can't control price, how are prices set in markets? And the answer is they're set actually by the market. And therein, which we're going to learn later, that's the beauty and that's the power of a competitive market. Okay. I also want to bring back our old friend, the circular flow, just to reiterate a point about competition. In a competitive market, buyers are competing with other buyers, and sellers are competing with other sellers. We know the circular flow, we're aware of it, but it's a real subtle takeaway that in a competitive market, the real competition is between buyers and other buyers for scarce goods and services, and between sellers and other sellers for the scarce factors of production. So bear in mind that it's really, we have this view that it's buyers against sellers and they're out to screw us, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. In a competitive market, buyers are actually competing against other buyers and sellers against other sellers, okay? The final point I want to bring up as we start this is back to our circular flow model. Buyers will include households who buy the goods and services, as well as businesses that buy resources. Again, simple views always say, oh, firms sell and we buy as households, okay? But the circular flow says there's a little bit more nuance to that. Buyers include households, you and I, who buy goods and services, as well as businesses who buy resources. And on the flip side, sellers obviously include the businesses that sell goods and services, but sellers also include us, households, when we make decisions to sell our resources. Do that again here, including our labor, to businesses. So I want to get you thinking a little bit about markets from the broad context. What are markets? They're a way to organize economic activity and answer three basic questions: what to make, how to make it, who gets it. Are they the only system? No, there's alternative forms of economic activity, economic organization, notably political organization like socialism or communism. I would offer that those systems suck. I also want to put in context that the competition and the presence of buyers and sellers in a market goes back to the circular flow, and I want you to have a nuanced view of how that works. Now that we have that overview, let's jump into our next video where we learn and talk about the law of demand, which focuses on buyer behavior. Let's jump into that next. Thank you.